Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of our ongoing series, In Flow With, in which we sit down with some of the world's leading experts for impactful conversation about women's health. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Elizabeth Comen, an associate professor of medicine at NYU Langone in New York City. Earlier this year, Dr. Comen released her first book, All in Her Head: The Truth and Lies Early Medicine Taught Us About Women's Bodies and Why It Matters Today. And that's the part that I'm excited to jump into with you, Dr. Comen, because it turns out that we are still feeling the harmful ramifications of centuries worth of misinformation and just complete nonsense, quite frankly, when it comes to women and physical strength. In fact, in your book, you have a chapter called Muscle, in which you look at all the ways in which doctors have, for hundreds of years, encouraged women to be physically weak. Explain this to me.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And I wrote the book really as a walk through women's bodies in history, going back thousands of years, and by organ system, the same organ systems that really mirror the specialties of medicine today, whether it's our skeletal system, our cardiovascular system, our nervous system, to really understand the legacy that we inherit when we show up at the doctor's office today, how we perceive our bodies, and what limits us from really accessing our best health. So the muscular chapter, as you know, really focuses on what is the history of what we've been told about our bodies, both by society and culture, and how that influences what doctors were interested in and also promoted with our bodies. And there really has never been, at any point in medical history, in Western medical thought, a dominant theory that allowed for women to be strong, to be smart, to be strong, and to be capable. And how do we change that narrative moving forward?
And when they were studying women's bodies, were they doing research? Was there science behind kind of all of these ideas that they were floating, in which they were saying, you know, there are dangers to women's health if they participate in exercise, for example?
Well, science and medicine is complicated in that sense because it's been going on since we've been, a species. However, it's inextricably linked to the background of those who come to the table to do it. And for so long, women were not allowed to even be part of medical schools, right? And we were perceived as not being as smart. And when you look at the history, even Charles Darwin, who championed evolution, we were more primal, we were less intelligent, we were closer to the ground. If you look at pictures of our bodies in anatomical structures, they were almost egregious, grotesque versions of what they thought women were. Our heads were smaller, our hips were wider. Why? Because we were less intelligent and we were meant to birth babies as vessels and not necessarily play sports. And the muscular chapter opens with the history of the bicycle and women's ability or not ability to ride that, according to doctors.
And I found myself, quite frankly, screaming as I was reading this chapter because there are pages detailing the evils of bicycle riding, including this made-up idea that women would develop horror bicycle face if they were to ride a bicycle. Now, bicycle face is not a thing.
No.
So tell us about this horror that women were trying to avoid.
Well, the interesting thing is bicycles are fantastic in the sense that they give you this sense of freedom. You can leave your home. And back at the turn of the century, you didn't need a horse, you didn't need a buggy, and you didn't need a chaperone. So for women, it was a newfound sense of mobility. And throughout history, you see that the history of women riding bicycles was also associated with other themes of freedom, such as the right to vote. So suffragists were often pictured with a bicycle with them. But along with this idea of freedom and mobility from the home was also the concern, well, maybe women shouldn't be in those places. So it's fascinating if you look through medical journals that there were doctors coming out for and against women riding bicycles. And many of the concerns of women riding bicycles was that your muscles would get too bulky, you would exert yourself too much, it would affect your reproductive function and your pelvis, and also that you would develop what they termed bicycle face, which was essentially that your face would be frozen in a grimace from the exertion. And there was, throughout many, many newspapers, publications of the do's and don'ts of what women could do on a bicycle. Not what men could do and not do on a bicycle, but what women could do. And the other fear was that women would be masturbating on these bikes. And so for all of us who love the Peloton and Soul Cycle, well, that was clearly like Eureka, why we love it so much. And so it's fascinating to then see what doctors felt women were capable of.
Yeah.
And even the reference to this idea of bulky muscles and what that means. So when we try to understand where is this legacy of, even in medicine, women being told more cardio is better, or that we have to be a certain size, or that there's an ideal body weight or ideal size, that a lot of this has been baked into the system. I was looking at a Pilates class on the Upper East Side the other day, and some frequently asked questions were, one of the first questions was, am I going to become too bulky? Are my muscles going to be too bulky? So where in the history of medicine and the history of our culture have we been afraid of women developing muscles, when we know that strength training is key to our longevity in every possible aspect of a metabolic
There
health?
is so much to unpack in what you just said, but I'm going to start with maybe the simplest question of all, which is, what were some of the other activities that women were discouraged from participating in? I think you talked about just jumping up and down was like a big no-no.
Lots of things, whether it was running, and I know we have the Olympics coming up, and participation in competitive sport. If you look at what was acceptable for women to participate in, a lot of it was things that looked more feminine or more dainty and did not alter the idea of what it means to be a feminine physical body. One of the surprising things to me was there was an Olympic figure skater, fascinating. She had won in the Olympics. She also became a surgeon, a Harvard Medical School trained surgeon. And I feature her in the book because she was this Olympic athlete and a physician, and it really shows the context of what women understood they could do with their bodies. But reading literature about what she wrote was okay for women to do. She was against rowing or strength training or things that might limit what she perceived as also the beautiful feminine form. And so for a physician, a Harvard trained Olympian surgeon who's already overcome so much bias herself, to be talking about what women should and should not be doing from a physical standpoint is really fascinating for me.
And also having those conversations through the lens of aesthetics, not through health, which is what you expect from doctors, from healthcare providers. You know, other than saying this is the patriarchy at work, what else was at play here? You know, you've mentioned several times this idea of, you know, our reproductive organs. And I do think that sometimes in medicine there's this outsized focus on that aspect of our health systems, but not every other aspect. Does that play a role?
Well, I think if it speaks to the more broader term of women's health, that it's been reduced to this idea that we are our breasts and our reproductive function, where head to toe we are different than men and we are not small men. But throughout our culture, our society, and in turn infiltrating our medical system, is the idea that what we are born to do and is most valuable to us is our reproductive function as vessels. And that is certainly not the case for many, many women, and that doesn't address our entire healthcare system and our bodies.
And we still see that in medicine today, where we don't get, as we move through perimenopause and menopause, we don't have attention paid to our heart health and our brain health and every other aspect of our health. It's almost like the medical system stops at a certain point.
And there's so much focus on, well, women are crazy or hormonal, and you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. When you're going through puberty or when you're pregnant or whatever it may be, you're crazy then if you have PMS. And then once you're menopausal, well, you're an aging female, so what are you good for? One of the things that I discuss is the debate about whether they could be president or not. We're too hormonal when we're menstruating, and then we're too old and complicated.
Very convenient, isn't it?
Yeah. So when are we powerful and when are we strong? And also thinking about just our medical school training, I had very, very little in what women should and should not do in terms of exercise, what's safe during pregnancy, what's safe during any age, what different types of exercise are key. And much of the messaging was about body mass index, and that women should be a certain weight and a certain bracket of what's a healthy body mass index. And we know that that entire scale was not developed with a real sense of what it means to be healthy.
And that comes back to the subtitle of your book, you know, why this matters today and why we're having this conversation is because we are still feeling the ramifications of this legacy. I mean, I'm of a generation that, if I was encouraged to lift weights, which I really was not, I was handed a set of 3-pound, hand weights or ankle weights, something that would still keep me very lithe and slim, but not bulky, not big, because God forbid we should actually show muscle.
Right.
So talk to me about what women actually need to know when it comes to strength training.
And I'm learning this too. So I grew up as a dancer and playing sports. I tore my ACL ligament in my knee when I was 14 and was told, well, let's see how active you become, dear. And of course, I was super active and then ended up almost needing my whole knee repaired when I heard it later, 4 years later.
But maybe you won't need that knee.
No, maybe I won't need it and I'll just sort of like prance around on a stage or something. Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot that we need to know. And I can say even from my own experience as someone who's been a lifelong athlete and dancer and into fitness, so much of my own journey was focused on cardio, and strength is so important at every stage for mobility, for flexibility, for strength, for the ability to live in this world. And if you take a fall, not break a bone, and as you get older, maintaining your bone density really comes in large part from strength training. And we know through every metric that you age better when you are stronger. And yet to teach a 40, 50, 60, 70-year-old woman how to strength train is overwhelming. I saw a young woman in clinic the other day, barely over 30, and she was just getting into these HIIT workouts and had no idea how to do a squat. That's not her fault. This is not something that we teach. And yet her husband was like, oh, I did a lot of strength training in college and this is the form. But yet we don't teach women these basic mechanics, and often they're getting hurt when they're starting out, even if they know that it's important that they learn.
Do you think we're reaching a tipping point, or have reached a tipping point, in this information, this realization that women need to strength train? Is that message being accepted, or do you think we still have work to do?
Well, we're doing this today, and you have a huge reach, so thank you so much. And I think there are a lot of people out there that are trying to dismantle these obstacles and biases. But this idea of the skinny, beautiful woman, or the heroin chic, or the dainty woman, whether it's the tuberculosis fainting woman in the Victorian era,
fragile,
or the fragile heroin chic woman that is so sick but yet so beautiful. I think that still insidiously weaves itself into our culture in lots of different ways. But yet there are loud voices, powerful women and men that are really encouraging women to step into their power, to understand their bodies better, that aging isn't just about some 12-step skincare regimen and bath and making sure that we sleep, but also taking the time to understand our bodies better and build them back even stronger.
You talked earlier about all of the debate that there has been about women's bodies through many, many years. And yet we don't have the same kind of debate about men's bodies. Like, should men run, or should they lift weights, or is it okay for men to ride a bicycle?
Right.
Why are men immune from this conversation, and why have women been such a source almost of obsession?
Yes, I think we haven't been allowed to be part of these circles of power. And when we think about who's in the position of power, who's in leadership positions, it's incredible that I mentioned earlier that women were not allowed to be part of medical schools for so long. And of course that history has changed, and over greater than 50% of women who graduate medical school are women, right? Which is fantastic. But yet in many different specialties, we don't have the same representation of women, and even more so in positions of leadership. So I think to really change the conversation around women's health, we need to make sure that it's not just the lay public that's banging pots and drums and doctors in pockets, but also doctors who are in positions of leadership who can help represent the diversity of our population and really speak to the different narratives that we need to improve upon.
Well, thank you for being part of helping to drive this change. And if we could have one final question, let's say you're writing an update to this book 5 years from now. What do you hope the muscle chapter reads like?
Oh, what a great question. Thank you. I love to have vision, and I love to dream big with incredible people such as yourself. I think I would like to see the arc of medicine and the change therein, by which I mean that in order to change the narrative about what we understand about strength, we have to not just understand it in the gym, but really much earlier than that. And to be academic for a second, preclinical studies and the research that we do is so important. Yes. So if you look at the recent White House initiative, which is aimed towards improving women's health, how we invest in women, not just when they come to the doctor's office, but how we understand their needs very early on so that we start to ask the questions of what do we need to do to help women be stronger, to have better longevity, and to start that with the questions that we ask from a research perspective. What do we really need to be teaching them? All the way through clinically meaningful treatments later on in life and the doctor and patient conversations that we have. So I'd like to see an improvement, if I can dream big,
yes.
not just in the exam room, but the type of research that's being conducted and the type of messaging that we give women beyond just the one-on-one doctor saying, let's have you strength train 5 days a week.
Yeah.
The whole world needs to change in terms of that messaging.
Well, there is clearly a lot of work that we still have to do, but it's inspiring to see doctors like you doing that work. Thank you so much for talking with us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much.